Hello everybody, this is my presentation, Childhood in Ancient Mesoamerica, by yours truly, Xavier McLean. Let's get started. So the first thing I looked at was for children and their historic role in archaeology. This particularly means from the perspective of the person who is doing the archaeology and how they view children. And so children are historically underrepresented in archaeological studies. A lot of times they're kind of considered in the background. They're usually secondary, almost like a bit of a helpless role, but we find out that many times in our history, children are very essential to the public making of process. So they are a single worker. Children have responsibilities that were important, but they're also restricted to their age and just general inexperience. And in ancient Mesoamerica, for the people themselves, they had a kind of treatment of children that remained in flux, where children were both features of background and also took center stage for pivotal social practices. So for my paper, I looked at the three main roles that you could designate the occupation for, right? So Mesoamerican children at the time between the Maya and Aztecs primarily. So the role of sacrifice, role performer, and worker. And there is a difference between role performer and worker, because worker focus more so on the material aspects of performing in society, while role performer talks more about the cultural aspects of that. But we're going to start out with sacrifice first. So sacrifice is considered kind of one of the load-bearing roles for society to function properly. Children were considered favorable due to their vitality and closeness to the gods that exceeded animals and captives. And some sacrificial children were given a higher availability of resources. This usually turned into having better quality food. I'll explain this a little bit later too when we talk about siblings, but essentially sacrificed children who were going to be sacrificed usually got the better pick of the food, more chances to eat meat rather than just like a regular maize meal or something along those lines. So to continue sacrifice, we have children that were chosen to be sacrificed also tended to suffer from health conditions such as malnutrition or lesions of the body, which kind of makes me wonder, are people sacrificing those who are already, because they're socially acceptable when they're already ill, and that sort of nature. So if you were a sacrificial victim, blue paint was used to signify importance of subjects to be sacrificed. And there were gender differences. I mean, young girls were often also picked for sacrifice, but based on the context, we find that a lot of young boys were actually picked for sacrifice, and they were often related or they were twins. And the great cenote found in Chichen Itza was continuously used to some degree until the contact period. And they also mentioned that child sacrifices were used to make offerings to the gods, along with idols and other things of that nature. So the Aztecs particularly had a sacrificial importance called Atacolo or Atlacalo, or the ceasing of the water of the rain, which was the name of the first festival of the year. Adults organized a sacrificial period at this time, where they were on seven separate hilltop shrines surrounding Tenochtitlan, and children were slaughtered to restore rain after drought. And the ones that they preferred were children with two calyx in their hair, considered like whirlpools. Those were the preference was there, and you can see here a picture of the important blue for sacrificial practices. So we have social performer next, and this is essentially unlike the European context. There were looser interpretations on what gender could consist of, but these are still reinforced by dedicated rituals and structural norms needed to be performed. Children continued and legitimized reinforced behaviors that helped construct society. So going back to what I had said previously, children were essentially viewed by archaeologists for a very long time as mini adults. But there is a lot of nuance on how these roles are actually presented, because they have to not only learn how to navigate the world of children within themselves, but they also are expected to take on specific roles as they mature to be within adulthood, and how to just have a basic understanding of like how society functions. So for childhood rituals among the Aztecs, again, this information comes from the Codex Mendoza, for example. Children had had a given birth name with a differentiating name to be given upon adulthood. Rituals required the drink of pulque, and specialized vessels were used, made specifically for children to carry, and they would use these to teach them how to like bloodlet and use ear piercings and other performances to help facilitate that. Healers designated for children were also trained as well, considering they were seen as a separate community members. That is one of the things to think about. It actually reminds me of kind of like how pediatrics today are important for working on children, and having that specialty care kind of shows a synthesis between community care and health within that and the life of the individual. So continuing on this, we have childhood ritual 2, where children of loyal lineages were occupying positions of power early in their lives. Earlier in the classic Maya examples, we learned about like kings who ascended to power relatively young, and this was still the case among the royals or the Aztecs, and later influential positions of Mayan as well. But essentially, they were often guided by advisors who weaponized their status in general ignorance, having this essential counsel that kind of goes with them and teaches them the way of the land, but based on how they want to do it, kind of really shows that trust, but also the ideas of vulnerability with childhood as well. So younger siblings are prioritized over the older adult once you had a sibling, and they were given more variety of resources to guarantee their survival, while the older one ate a diet more like adults. So younger siblings had greater opportunities for meat, fish, other things like that to kind of fatten them up and get them to survive that hump, while the older siblings who had already passed that were mostly eating maize and tortillas and things of that nature. So an interesting section of the codices that I found particularly odd, or well, not odd, but I guess fascinating, was punishment. And there were designated rules for like how parents should punish their children if they deviated from the rules. And so like, what are they? So Aztec parents threatened children with cactus spine poking along the wrist, sweeping the floors, among other things. Some of these were pretty typical punishments that like parents would do today, like taking things away from them that they liked, not letting them see others. And then others are more strange, such as like holding children above smoked chilies to make their eyes water. That's definitely creative. There was one case where this father had his son stripped down and lie in cold mud. I'm not exactly sure what that accomplished, but I suppose it was embarrassing or something like that to the young child, and that's something that they did until it dried off. But yeah, the cactus spines were put along the arm, and in the case of male children, the father would threaten to stab either their hands or their penis. So definitely an incentive to not act up as a child. So let's talk about the worker son. Work was delineated among gender lines for children. Young men were with fathers in agricultural settings, planting maize and tending to livestock, while girls learned to weave and haul water for plants. A lot of iconographic art produced directly within Aztec society mentions that fathers were typically responsible for masculine roles, and mothers did the same as a feminine counterbalance for their daughters. So some age expectations in working as well. The Florentine Codex mentions for Aztecs that there are 3 primary stages of life, accompanied with 4-year stages that end at age 12. And when you're around 4 to 8 years old, you're dressed in your occupation and role, kind of like teach you what to expect, and also reinforce that both within dress, but also within just greater society at large. 4 to 8 is also the time when you're allowed to finally, you first get punished for things that you do wrong. So instilling right and wrong at a very young age is what's important to that process. Once you were age 12, new adults were given pierced ears and adult representative hairstyles. And of course, craft production was encouraged by both parents to teach responsibilities in the home and to encourage independence of their children. Lastly, we also have men and women employment opportunities, where social classes also affected the worker. Grown women of privilege could work with embroidery, making textiles for the palace, or hold their own in the marketplace with goods of their own. Men were offered learning opportunities at the Kolmek, or crafting careers such as weaponsmiths and gold workers. For those who weren't born in royalty, but still had some status, being able to do um, roles that were important within society were one of the things that these kids were trained on how to do, often from doing apprenticeship with people in that profession or with their parents, and therefore they would use that to essentially build themselves up. And of course, it's important to mention that all of these roles, sand sacrifice, and even in some cases, for sacrifice, would have all have been continuously going together because, for example, the textiles person would be making the blankets that sacrificial victims would be wrapped in and used at the end of their life cycle. Or, you know, for the role performer, it's important because every single person here has an expectation that they're doing, and then that is separated out based on what their contribution is. For the sacrificial person, once they are sacrificed, they are out of society in that way, but they contribute back with their sacrifice by promoting balance, or whatever else is needed to facilitate what's needed that day. And for the workers, they produce agriculture, they capture food, they make the physical things that people need to survive and keep society going. And so all of these three things together, for children, are essentially the life paths that they take um, in order to become functional adults. And then that process, honestly, continues to grow, at least for the latter two. Obviously, the first one stops pretty quickly. Although adults can also be sacrificed, children were considered more of a pure sacrifice due to their age and their closeness to the gods. And last but not least are my references. Thank you.